Hello everyone and welcome to game 1 of round 1 of the Meltwater Champions Chester. It's the start of the Magnus Carlsen Invitational Preliminaries, and it's a very nice game between Jordan van Foreest and Magnus Carlsen. Of course, it's again the rapid time format, and we're gonna discuss a little bit more about the tournament, but as usual, whenever a tournament starts, I just show the first game and then we discuss the tournament as the tournament slowly progresses. But it's the part of the Magnus Carlsen Invitational, so you pretty much know what's happening here. So let's check out the game and then we're gonna see what's what. So Van Foreest with the white pieces opens with e4, and we all know what Magnus replies to e4. That of course is the Sicilian defense. We have c5, knight to f3 and the g6, going for this hyper accelerated dragon variation. We have bishop to c4, not going for the open Sicilian with d4, and now Magnus goes bishop to g7. We have c3 and now d6. We have d4 striking in the center, and we have a trade. Captures, and now knight to f6, putting pressure on that e4 pawn, and Van Foreest defends it. We have knight to c3 and castles by Magnus. Now, this bishop here could come under attack after moves like queen to c7, so you very rarely want it to stay on c4. Pretty much in all lines against the Sicilian, you will play bishop to b4. And now Magnus continues development. We have knight to c6 and now h3, preventing this normal development of the bishop. We have b5 now by Magnus, and this is the star move of the show. It's not a new move; it has been played before, but only 3 times in international events, and the idea is that of course you're offering this pawn, and it seems like you just want to trade, offer the b pawn for the e4 pawn, but it's actually much stronger than that. What you've done here is you've opened up the bishop to play bishop to a6 and grab hold of this diagonal, and this would be kind of problematic for white, because black would very gladly give up this pawn, deliver check. Now you have to bring the knight back, otherwise you're going to lose the knight. So knight c3 and now bishop to a6 cuts off the king from castling, and this is what Magnus was going for. But Van Foreest, of course, is not interested in that. He just castles, and now comes b4. So moving away this knight from the defense of the e4 pawn. So now knight to d5. And now what do you do here? It seems like Van Foreest is offering the e4 pawn, but can Magnus really grab it? If you go knight captures on e4, then you get queen to c2 with this double attack. This knight is under attack and this knight is under attack, and you will lose one of the knights. So it's actually not a free pawn. So instead, after knight to d5, we have knight captures by Magnus, bishop captures, and now bishop to b7, defending the knight on c6 and preparing rook to c8. And here, there is one game in the database where rook to e1 was played, but here we have, instead of rook to e1, bishop to e3, and it is now, as of move 13, that we have a completely new game. So let's see how Magnus deals with it. He first starts with rook to c8, and it does make sense. The c file is the only open file on the board. And now queen to a4, putting pressure on the c6 knight here, and also on the pawn on a7. So if you remove the defender of the pawn, you can eliminate the a7 pawn. We have e6. Magnus even tries to force this, and while you could do this, for example, bishop captures, and now you could grab one of the pawns, it could be a bit risky getting the queen so deep into the opponent's position, but also black can just grab the e4 pawn as well, so it's not all that impressive. So instead, after e6, Van Foreest just goes back, bishop to b3, and now knight to a5. Now you can see that this queen isn't doing all that great. The b pawn is still possible. It's possible to capture the b4 pawn, but you could very easily see something like queen to b6, bishop to c6, and the white queen is trapped. But it's not so easy. So first, the e4 pawn is under attack, and we start with knight to d2. Van Foreest now defends the e4 pawn, and now we have d5 by Magnus. We have rook f to c1, offering a trade of rooks, and now knight captures on b3. If you start with queen to b6, it seems like a bishop to c6 should be winning for black, but there is this rook to c5, controlling the square and also attacking the a5 knight. And now you don't really have anything better than knight captures on b3. So Magnus skips all of this, and he goes knight captures on b3 right away. We have a captures on b3. And now a trade on c1. We have rook captures with check, rook captures, and now d captures on e4. We have queen captures on a7, grabbing back the pawn, and bishop to d5 now, cementing this bishop here. And as you can see, the material is completely even. Magnus has a doubled e pawn, Van Foreest has the doubled b pawn, but Magnus has the bishop pair. So if that bishop pair can come alive, black should have a slight advantage. So here, rook to c7. Definitely advantageous for white to grab hold of the 7th rank like this. Now black will have troubles developing here because you can never develop the rook. You start losing everything along the 7th rank. So here, queen to a8. Magnus has to kick away the queen. The queen simply cannot remain there. We have knight to c4. The knight is now excellently placed here because it's either a very strong piece or you have to capture it, and then white fixes his pawn structure. So Magnus trades on a7. We have captures, and now f5, defending that e4 pawn and maybe preparing f4 in some lines. So here, while Van Foreest could defend with the g3, he actually allows Magnus to push f4. So he goes knight to e5, and now f4. Attacking that bishop. Bishop back to d2, and now Magnus eliminates the knight on e5, because even though he has the bishop pair, the knight on e5 is just a monster. So here he starts with bishop captures on e5, d captures on e5, and now g5. And now that's a very, very impressive pawn chain here, and Magnus will now start bringing his king into the game. Hopefully you want to trade off the pair of rooks, but in this position, if you traded off the rooks, you would be left with opposite colored bishops, and that means that you will not be able to push for more than a win here, more than a draw here. And I forgot to mention, I think, I'm not sure because I only caught a glimpse of the live coverage. I think Van Foreest was late to the game, and then that he lost some 7 minutes, 6 or maybe 7 minutes on the clock, maybe even 8, and that he started with a deficit on the clock. I could be wrong on this, but I think it is so. So here after g5, we have bishop captures on b4, now attacking the rook here, and rook to c8. Magnus is now ready to bring the rook to the 2nd rank. We have bishop to c3, preventing this, and now bishop captures on b3. So Magnus is ready to create a pass pawn here, whereas Van Foreest has a pass pawn, but it's currently being blocked by the bishop. So here, rook to a3, chasing the bishop back, bishop to c4, and now bishop to a5. This is a very important move as it covers the b6 and b4 squares, and now, of course, you will start pushing your pass pawn. So bishop to d5, and now rook to c3. Van Foreest wants to trade off the rook, so he wants to enter the opposite colored bishop endgame, and he does have the outside pawn, not completely outside, but outsider than all the other pawns. And here, if you traded rooks, it's pretty much a guaranteed draw. So rook to b8, Magnus still wants to fight here, and now b4. The pawn is very well protected on b4, and king to f7. Now Magnus starts bringing the king into the game. Maybe you can even sneak the king over to f5, maybe grab the pawn. We'll see how it goes. So rook to c7 check, king to g6, and now rook to d7, preparing rook to d8 to again try and trade off the pair of rooks. So here e3, Magnus creates a pass pawn. We have f captures, and now rook to d8 as planned. Magnus again, of course, declines this. We have rook to b7, and now rook to f8. And this is where Van Foreest could have gone a little bit better with a move like g4, completely cutting off Magnus from entering the game with his king. It would be somewhat harder for Magnus to make progress here. However, after this rook to f8 move, he gives Magnus a very nice idea. Magnus plays bishop to c4. Now he cuts off the king from entering the game. The pawn and bishop control these two squares. We have rook to f6 check, king to g7, and now rook to f3, attacking the pawn and forcing the pawn to come to e2 so the king can come to f2. And here we have pawn to e2, and now we have this very tricky position where Van Foreest needs to prevent the pawn from queening. And of course there's a perfectly natural way to do this, just king to f2 and everything is fine. Or is it? The point is, what you have to play here is actually b5. The king f2 just doesn't work. You have to give up some material to save the game, and then after, for example, rook captures, you're going to play bishop to e2, you're going to give up another pawn, and then you're going to play king f2 and try to fight this. However, Van Foreest played king to f2 right away, thinking that, okay, I mean, it's the exact same thing, but it's actually not. So feel free to pause the video here and win the game for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on thinking outside of the box. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's bishop to b5. You already know what white's plan is. White's plan is to push b5, so why not prevent white from pushing b5? So it's not the exact same thing, king f2 followed by b5 or b5 followed by king to f2, because then you could have played b5. Now Magnus no longer allows it. Bishop to b5. This is the only winning idea, so congratulations to everyone who found it. And now it's very, very hard for white to play this. We have rook to e3, but now rook to f7 check. We have rook to f3. Magnus again declines the trade. Rook to d7. He wants to get behind the white king. We have rook to e3, again trying to eliminate this pawn even at the price of a rook, because that's your only way to save the game. But Magnus, of course, doesn't allow it. Rook to d2. We have bishop to b6, now trying to activate the bishop somehow, and rook to b2. We have bishop to d4 attacking the rook, now just rook to b1, preparing this rook to come to f1, and now you really don't have anything good here. You could try sacrificing here, but now after king captures you also lose the b4 pawn, so you really have no compensation here. With the passed b pawn, it's maybe possible to prolong and maybe hope that black blunders something, but here not so much. So here after rook to b1, bishop to c3, but now rook to f1 with check. We have king to g3 and now h5, completely cutting off the white king from the game. All of these squares are now covered. We have h4 and Magnus goes g4, not allowing the king back into the game. We have rook to e4 now, but it doesn't help. Just rook to c1. Attacking the bishop here, and now the bishop can no longer help out here. We have bishop to d2 attacking the rook. We have rook to d1, and it was in this position on move 50 that Jordan van Foreest resigned the game, and the first game of the tournament in round 1 goes to Magnus Carlsen. So very nice game, very nicely played. I particularly enjoyed that b5 move, sort of like a reversed Evans Gambit sort of thing, because I know how much you guys enjoy the Evans Gambit and all. So hope you like that idea as well. But yeah, here you resign because your bishop is under attack and there's nothing you can do. If you move it, you don't really have a good square to move it. If you go bishop to c3, then rook d3 check, and then the bishop is lost. So that's one way to do it, and the other way to do it is to simply move the bishop somewhere. That does not cover the e1 square. For example, you could go bishop to f4, but then we just bring the queen into the game and the white has to part with the rook, and that's just it. Black again has the winning advantage. So yeah, after rook to d1, Van Foreest resigned, and an excellent victory for Magnus Carlsen in round 1. We'll see how it goes, and will he be able to continue this. But these are only the preliminaries. However, you still have to play well in order to qualify for the main event, which we are going to discuss at length, starting with game 2, game 3, game 4, and all of the other games that we're going to cover. But yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Sean O'Connor, The Good Stuff Raji, David Kimura, Alan Callahan, and Bruce Moody for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this very nice tournament, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. Sorry, I forgot something, so I had to do it now. See you soon, guys.